The sitting is resumed. Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to join this discussion on this resolution of the Charter of Barbados 2021 with great pride, as has been the case on every occasion that I have had the privilege to speak in this chamber. I am cognizant of the great obligation that has been placed upon us all. I am also aware of the honor to stand where great men and women have in the past, working to shape what is regarded as one of the most stable democracies in the world. It is a responsibility I do not take lightly, sir. And as I rise, I am wary of the discourse within the public sphere on the document before us. I first, however, wish to commend the chair and members of the Republic Status Transition Advisory Committee, and in particular the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights and Principles, which was chaired by a truly remarkable young woman, Mrs. Sharita Granham, who guided us ably. And she is a true example of the high standard of our education system and what we can produce in this country. It is from that subcommittee that this charter emerged. As we transition to a parliamentary republic, sir, it was felt that we should have some emblem, something that reflects the journey we have taken as a people and the aspirations and hopes that we have for generations to come. Having participated in the consultations, I wish to state from the outset, without reservation, that at no point in time this document was ever purported to replace the preamble or the Constitution of this country. In fact, from the outset, it was intended not to have any legal power, but just to set out, as I said, the hopes and aspirations of our people, balanced with the right and responsibilities. Nothing enforceable. It was most shocking to hear some of the rhetoric about removing God from a document that didn't exist. This Parliament, both chambers, voted to amend the Constitution of Barbados for the change of the head of state from a monarch to a president, and adopted the Constitution of Barbados with all else intact, including its preamble, which acknowledges the supremacy of God. And that was voted on by every member in both parties, both chambers, save two. And I do not believe that they opted not to support it because they wanted to wipe out the supremacy of God from the Constitution. Mr. President, the Charter, as I mentioned before, is not enforceable. It therefore depends on the willing participation of all. It must be a document, it must have been a document that had the type of language that would embrace all people and make all people comfortable interacting with it. I can tell you that the committee sat for long hours and deliberated over just about every word in this charter. And we opted to use the primary attribute of God from which is derived all others, Creator. It was God's initiation of interaction with this world and the creation of humanity that gave us access to all the other attributes we place on Him. It is through that we come to learn of His mercy, we come to rely upon His divine governance, and ultimately, all the attributes we've ascribed to Him. Creator, as the primary attribute of God, is the one all humanity can access. whether one refers to him, as I learned only a few nights ago, and I might get this pronunciation wrong, the great geometrician. Sound like I got it right.
The grand.
Or as Aristotle put it.
The grand geometrician.
As Aristotle put it, sir, the first cause of all causes. Or perhaps we may want to go to the British philosopher William Paley, who used the analogy of the watchmaker. He said if you were walking on the beach somewhere and you found a watch and you looked at it and observed all the intricate details, you would be led to believe that somewhere in the world there's a great watchmaker. So too, when you observe the beauty and magnificence of creation, one cannot help but acknowledge the existence of a great creator. And this is there in Holy Scripture, sir. When the psalmists are trying to speak about the attributes of God, for example, in Psalm 19 and verse 1, the heaven declares the glory of God, and the firmament his handiworks. It is through the creation that we access this glory of God. When the psalmist in Psalm 8 speaks about the divine governance of God, O Lord, our governor, how majestic is thy works in all the world. When I consider the world that thy hands have made, the sun and the moon, the stars you have set in their motion, I have to think, what is man? What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? It is through the attribute of creator that we access those things. For if there is no creation, we do not know anything about God. That is why the church of which I'm a part, in both of our creeds, both the baptismal and the communal creed, the Apostles and the Nicene Creed, the very first tenet is, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. It is the source of our being. I'm flabbergasted. I expected that not to come from Christian circles. Not from Christian circles. Not after we've adopted the Constitution with its preamble in place speaking about the supremacy of God. Where's the beef? Mr. President, as we stand here, this earth is turning on its axis at 1,000 miles per hour. It is orbiting the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. Do you feel it? That's the magnificence of God, the Creator. That's why we acknowledge him. That's how we can access him. Because as the psalmist said in Psalm 30, one day tells its tale to another. Every day there is the magnificence of God being displayed before us. And that speaks to the attribute of Creator. Mr. President, this is a strange time. Very strange. You know, I shudder to think of what the comments would have been had we drafted the National Pledge of Barbados at this time, because it doesn't mention God at all. We would have been going to hell. It is just really strange. But I leave that where it is. I want to spend my time speaking on something more substantial at this time. I wish to thank Senator Drakes, Senator Cummins, who have spoken before, for their clear articulation of what is presented here in the Charter. The Charter speaks to our desire to preserve and renew the physical environment. The institution of which I'm a part, the Anglican Church, sir, or the Church of England as they call it, we have 5 marks of mission. And the 5th mark of mission says to safeguard the integrity of creation and renew the life of the earth. It speaks to regeneration, not just conserving, but renewal. Because as we mentioned in this charter as well in Article 2, every generation is indebted to the ones that went before it and is obligated to the ones that come after. And that speaks to every aspect of our existence. It speaks to our environment. And so it challenges us as Barbadians to make sure that we leave an environment that can sustain generations to come. Because anything other than that would be genocide. Because we'll be leaving for our children and our children's children a country that cannot sustain them. This charter has that depth of thought in it, sir. It speaks to our pursuit of equity and creating a level playing field for all citizens. I feel like I'm in church now. To pursue their goals and their dreams. And I always remember a few months ago, sir, Senator Drakes gave a statistic in here about a considerable percentage of our hotel stock in the hands of only a few entities. And that bothered me. It bothered me because it says, as Barbadians, there's still a lot more work to be done to level the playing field. As I said, it speaks to our obligation that is laid upon every citizen to respect the sacrifices of those who went in the past. And if you read the lines of this document, sir, you can almost picture yourself as you grew up. You picture the village. You picture the challenges that people would have faced. But you also get a reminder of the love that existed amongst us and moved us to the point that we're at. It acknowledges our respective journeys as people, recognizing that Barbados is a society made up of people from all walks of life who came here with different motives and for different reasons. But what it also acknowledges is that through it all, we have worked together to build a stable, strong, democratic, free society, in spite of all that has happened. The children of slaves and the children of planters, and sometimes those attributes reside in the same person, have worked together to build a society of which we are all proud today. It also speaks to our intent to create a society in which no one experiences discrimination of any kind. And I intend to spend a little time on this, sir. Mr. President, participating in some of the sessions with the various groups was an eye-opener. Particularly our meeting with persons with disabilities brought home to me how easily we can be moving around, going about our business, oblivious to the struggles that others face every single day in their lives, just to execute the things that for us are commonplace. And sometimes the obstacles that are placed in their way inadvertently by us in executing those duties. It brought home to me how some of us still see persons with disabilities. I remember one gentleman lamenting that he had expressed a desire to pursue a university degree and was asked by someone, "Why are you doing that? You're disabled." I could feel the pain in his voice through the virtual call, sir. But thanks God, he said he managed to get some funding from someone overseas and he is pursuing his studies. We still have a lot of work to do here. Though we have progressed way beyond the time when families were ashamed of those with disabilities and such persons were hidden away, when people were coming to the home, we still have some way to go. But Jesus' disciples did as well. In John chapter 9, we're told that Jesus was walking with his disciples and they encountered a man who was blind. He was blind from birth. And their first question was, Lord, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, neither have sinned. He is born blind so that the glory of God may be revealed. The disabled people in our midst are here so that the glory of God may be revealed. That is the love and compassion and genuine care that we show for them and what they're going through. How we seek to remove the obstacles to help to make their lives better and more comfortable in this world. And so you will notice in the charter, sir, we have not mentioned disability. We've mentioned people that we will not discriminate against based on their ability. Because everyone has ability. And what we need to do is to find what people are good at and encourage them. And do everything possible for people to live their best lives in this society. But I know I stand here, sir, and some are waiting with bated breath to hear what a priest has to say on another matter. It would be remiss of me if I spoke to this charter and did not expound on what can be dubbed the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Article 1 of the Charter. Mr. President, the article speaks to the protection of rights and freedoms of all our citizens and the prevention of discrimination. And just to repeat Article 1, though I suspect there are some people who can recite it. All Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity and rights, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, faith, class, cultural and educational background, ability, sex, gender, and sexual orientation. I think the stickling point for some has been gender and sexual orientation, because sex was always there in our Constitution. In the 1998 Ford report, sir, there was a call to include gender in the list of things that we will not discriminate against. When the 2004 draft of the Constitution was written, it was not added. I suspect then that one of the major issues surrounding gender would have been more inclusive language, as someone would have called for in the Constitution. And the balancing of men and women's rights. In 2021, gender speaks to much more than that, and it challenges us. And sir, if you permit me, I'll quote from a document, a book by the United Nations published in 2019, Born Free and Equal, Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Sex Characteristics in International Human Rights Law. It's the second edition. And in that text, they gave some definitions for these things. First, sex. It says, one is assigned a sex at birth, male or female, based on genitalia, reproductive anatomy, chromosomes, hormones, secondary physical characteristics. That's your sex. It then goes on to say gender. Gender is divided into two sections. There's identity, which reflects a deeply felt and experienced sense of one's own gender. And in that context, we get the terms cis and transgender, where a cisgender person is a person whose gender identity matches the sex that they've been assigned, whereas a transgender person is a person whose gender identity is opposite to the sex that they've been assigned. It then goes on to speak to gender expression. And gender expression is the way we express our gender through actions and appearance, dress, speech, and mannerisms. Now, the construct of gender, of what is normal for male and normal for female, is based on the culture and the society in which one resides. But it goes on to say that gender expression does not necessarily indicate gender identity. What does that mean, sir? You remember Shadow's song, Stinkto? If I quote a line, you may know it. They tell me don't walk with Jacob. Jacob too like to walk and shake up. You know that song?
Indeed, indeed.
I'm going to have to get some music for Senator Boyce. Yes, they tell me don't walk with Jacob. Jacob too like to walk and shake up. And what it spoke to is men whose mannerisms, whose expression did not match the sex that they were. Right? It then speaks to sexual orientation, sir. And I need to clearly point out what this means. It refers to a person's physical, romantic, and or emotional attraction towards other people. Therefore, for example, people that are identified as gay and lesbian are attracted to their same sex. Heterosexual people are attracted to the opposite sex. And bisexual are the same or different sex. Now, I've heard recently that sexual orientation is a new thing and not clearly delineated, but I think the term heterosexual has been around for so long and everybody knows what it means. That is sexual orientation. Why is this important? Mr. President, because for the first time in 2015, the UN acknowledged the existence of a category of persons referred to as intersex. Intersex. People who are born with physical characteristics that do not fit the normative definition of male or female bodies. And so our charter does not even include all the categories that should be there, because one of the categories that is now being included, for example, in some states in Australia, is sexual characteristics, because people who are intersex are neither male nor female. Mr. President, every human embryo has structures called, and I'm treading on thin ice here with the doctor right behind me. Every human embryo has structures called Wolffian and Mullerian ducts. The Wolffian ducts give rise to male reproductive and urinary system, the vas deferens, testes, etc. And the Mullerian ducts give rise to the female reproductive system, ovaries, uterus, vagina, etc. Both are present in every embryo. Both are present in every embryo. But what every embryo also has in the nucleus of its cells is DNA, chromosomes. 23 pairs of them in normal persons. It is the 23rd pair that is referred to as the sex chromosomes. If that 23rd pair is XX, then the embryo is expected to develop into a female. If it is XY, it is expected to develop into a male. I'll just give you a little snippet of what happens in, for example, a male embryo. At about 8 weeks, the embryo produces testosterone, and this triggers an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase 2, which metabolizes the testosterone and creates dihydrotestosterone. This gives rise to the first phase of development of the Wolffian ducts in the production of the male sex organs. At the same time, a hormone is produced to deactivate the Mullerian ducts. And so because a male child is being produced, the female ducts dissipate. Later on, at puberty, a second and more potent shot of testosterone is produced and leads to the secondary development of the sexual organs, sperm production, the increase in size of the phallus, testes, etc. Mr. President, it doesn't always work like that. That is the ideal situation. Some persons experience what we call 5-alpha reductase 2 deficiency. And what is this, sir? When they receive that shot of testosterone, because there's a deficiency in 5-alpha reductase, it is not potent enough to metabolize the testosterone to push the first phase of male development where it ought to be. And therefore, children are born with an indeterminate sex. When they're born, the doctors cannot tell whether it's a girl or a boy. The UN has been very, very clear on this, sir. Because in the past, what used to happen is that doctors and families will make a decision of whether it should be a girl or a boy and perform constructive surgery there. Only to find later on that the child does not identify with the sex assigned and experiences what is known as gender dysphoria, where they do not identify with the sex they're assigned and they go into states of depression and sometimes become suicidal, etc. The UN has said we have to stop mutilating our children. And there's good reason. In 1974, sir, there was a big uproar in a little village called Las Salinas in the Dominican Republic because their little girls were turning into boys. Their little girls were turning into boys. What they refer to, sir, as guevedoches, eggs at 12, or penis at 12. What was happening, sir, is that these children were identified as girls when they were born. And they were nurtured as girls, raised as girls within the community. But at puberty, when they got that second shot of testosterone, the penis started growing. Testes descended. And all of a sudden, people thought that they were being transformed into men. They were boys all along. And that is the danger with performing the surgeries beforehand. Some of those boys identify as male in gender, but the community sees them as girls still. So you have these challenges that people face in our world. An even more severe condition, sir, is androgen insensitivity syndrome. Androgen insensitivity syndrome, sir, is where a male embryo, XY, does not have receptors for the male hormones. And so the virilization that is supposed to occur at 9 weeks or later on at puberty doesn't. And you get a broad spectrum of forms that come out of this. You can get a female with female characteristics, but with XY chromosomes. Such persons, a good example, sir, and I hope I can call her name, is Phoebe Hart, who was a young Australian PhD student who did a documentary on her life as an intersex person. Phoebe Hart said, growing up, as a girl, but then when I hit puberty, I realized the girls were talking about menstruation and nothing was happening for me. And it was only then that her parents disclosed to her that nothing is going to happen, because she doesn't have a uterus, sir. What she has is just the first part of the vagina, and it ends there. And she has testes in her abdomen. They have to be removed, or they have a propensity to develop testicular cancer. This is similar to what we've been seeing on the world stage in athletics, sir, with what we refer to as DSD46XY athletes. They carry the XY chromosome, but they present as females phenotypically. And then there are other conditions like congenital adrenal hyperplasia, hypospadias, etc. In the world, sir, there are about 140 million babies born every year. 0.08% of them have these ambiguity of genitalia issues. That's about 110,000 babies. But then when you broaden the scope to look at other chromosomal issues and other issues such as Klinefelter's, which is where a person has not XY or XX, but XXY. And these people will develop, and later on they'll develop hips and breasts and so on, but they're male. I've highlighted all of that to say, sir, that because of this spectrum of possibilities, there is the propensity for persons to identify the gender that does not fit the sex that they're assigned. And in so doing, they may be attracted to someone who appears to be of their own sex. In fact, many in the intersex community have pushed not to be identified as a sex because of the stigma they get when they express an attraction for persons. A good example, sir, I believe one that we know only too well, I think has been well articulated, that Caster Semenya is an ASI athlete, Androgen Insensitivity syndrome. She's married to a woman. Is that a same-sex union, or is it heterosexual? Likewise, Phoebe Hart is married to a man. So these are the things that this document seeks to look beyond today. It seeks to deal with what a Barbados will be even in 50 years from now. But it also speaks to today, because I understood during lunch that just about up to 10 years ago in Barbados, there are just under 10 children born with one of these conditions in this little country. Could you imagine what they go through growing up in this country? Can you imagine what they have to deal with on a daily basis? I'll speak more to that later. But I know some may be questioning, okay, yes, are these 21st century issues or 20th century issues? No, sir. These are human issues from the dawn of time. It's always been there. In India, they refer to them as hijras and recognize them as a third gender. They had mystical properties assigned to them. To have a hijra sing at the birth of your son or your wedding was a blessing, because people sought to incorporate them into their community. Of course, in everything, you will get those who are genuine, and you will get those who are hitching a ride because you can get something out of it. You have to deal with that. But you can't punish those who are genuine because of what others do. In the Islamic world, they're there too. One of the caliphs of Islam, Al-Amin, who ruled from 809 to 813. From an early age, Al-Amin's mother realized something like it wrong with this boy. She realized that Al-Amin had what are described as homosexual tendencies. And she tried everything. Some writers suggest that she took little boys and dressed them up as army men to play with Al-Amin so he would become more masculine in his approach. Others say she took little girls and dressed them as boys and sent them into Al-Amin so that Al-Amin could at least be oriented to the opposite sex. As the caliph, he eventually got married and had children, but he also spent a lot of time, based on the writings, with his eunuchs. Because, sir, the term eunuch in antiquity had several meanings, and it's there in Judaism as well. In Judaism, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, the rabbis were reflecting on this person, and they said there are two types of eunuchs. There's the Saris Adam, he who is made that way by men, because in antiquity, people will either castrate or cut off the entire genitals of a man who is their servant, so that he can serve in their house. He'll have no family, he has no connections, and so he'll be loyal to the family. There were also women in the upper levels of society who traded heavily in castrated men because they couldn't get pregnant. You see. But here's how the rabbis described not the Saris Adam, the one made that way by men, but they recognized there's a Saris Hammer, he that is born that way, or what they call a sun eunuch. He was a eunuch from the time the sun hit him. And here's how they described him, sir. He has no beard. His hair is straight and his skin is smooth. His urine produces no froth. He urinates without producing an arch. He whose semen is watery. One whose voice is abnormal, so that you cannot distinguish if it is that of a man or a woman. You got a picture of that person, sir? Are you getting a picture of what we're talking about here? This is in Judaism. And these people existed throughout biblical history. They were incorporated into certain sections of the society because it was deemed they didn't make themselves that way, they were made that way by the hand of heaven. But they really could not participate in the covenant community, because the covenant community was not only that Israel was to serve God and he'll give them land, they were to become a great nation. The eunuch couldn't help them become a great nation because he cannot reproduce. So in Deuteronomy 23 and verse 1, we hear that no man who has his testicle crushed or his male member cut off shall enter the assembly of God. He cannot enter the assembly. He cannot participate in the covenant community because he doesn't have what is necessary to participate in the covenant community. But that same chapter has some characters in it that may suggest that the Saris Hammer and others in that spectrum of not only ambiguous genitalia but ambiguous gender were incorporated into the society. Because it speaks to the Kadesh and the Kadesha, the shrine prostitutes. In the ancient Near East, for example, in the Canaanite religion, the god Baal was the god of agriculture, and they perceived the fertility of the land coming by Baal having ritual sex with his wife Astarte in the heavenly realms, and therefore producing the fertility of the soil. In their religion, they mimicked that by having prostitutes at their worship places, who I assume had sex with the priests, to mimic what was happening with Baal and Astarte in the heavenly realm. That crept into Judahite practice as well. If you read 2 Kings 22 and 23, when Josiah is cleansing the temple, there were actually booths for the male prostitutes built at the temple. They were doing their trade there. But then Deuteronomy also has in verse 18 another group of people, the Zonah and the Caleb. It said you're not to accept any money from a Zonah, who is a prostitute, and a Caleb, who was translated as dog or sodomite, into the temple. This is that set of people who are plying their trade out there on the corner. This is not the sacred ones. So they differentiated between people. I should also add that clearly, according to Deuteronomy, the Levitical law of Leviticus 18:22 doesn't apply. That a man who lie with a man should die. That's gone. They've moved beyond that. And so you have this eunuch, sir. You have this group of people who cannot participate in the worship life of the community. But by the time you get to 3rd Isaiah, 3rd Isaiah is dated around the year 520 BC, chapters 56 to 66. And in chapter 56 it says, "Let no eunuch complain that I am a dry tree. To the eunuchs that keep my Sabbath, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, to them I will give them within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than the sons and daughters. I'll give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off." Here you're using two descriptions for eunuchs. A dry tree, he cannot reproduce, and that could mean the Saris Hammer, the son eunuch, but also cut off. That is the Saris Adam. A similar verse is reflected in Wisdom chapter 3, verse 14 and following. And so by the time we get to the New Testament, sir, eunuchs are an integral part of every society. They're part of the Greco-Roman world. In fact, some satirists spoke about them and give you an idea of who they are. Juvenal said, "When a eunuch takes a concubine, one cannot help but write a satire." In other words, fellas, get a drink and sit down. Let's watch what's going to happen here. Lucian put it another way. Lucian said, "A eunuch with a concubine is like a bald man with a comb, a deaf man with a harp, a blind man with a mirror." Can't do anything. So you're beginning to see who they're dealing with here. By the time we get to the New Testament, the Greek term eunuchos embodies a broad cross-section of persons, both what the Hebrews would have referred to as the Saris Hammer and also the Saris Adam. And in antiquity, there was homoerotic affection for these eunuchs, as I mentioned with Alamine and so on. So you had all kinds of people under this term eunuchos. And the gospel according to St. Matthew has Jesus acknowledging the presence of these people. For when he gets a question about marriage and so on, he says, There are eunuchs who are born that way. There are some who are made that way by men, and others who make themselves that way for the sake of the kingdom. That's Matthew 19 and verse 12. The writer of the book of Acts, whom we believe to be St. Luke, takes it a little further. In Acts chapter 8, this writer gives a rather interesting story that speaks to anti-discrimination. Philip the deacon was conducting this great mission in Samaria. Everything was going well. And all of a sudden, an angel of the Lord tells him, "Come, I want you to go down to a desert road, a deserted place." He goes down to this desert road and he sees one man in his carriage. It is a eunuch. And he's reading a particular passage. He's reading that servant song that we use for Good Friday sometimes. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, one from whom people hide their faces. He was marred beyond description and marred beyond human semblance. And the eunuch asked him, "Who is this passage about?" Many commentators who have reflected upon this said that the eunuch was probably coming down from Jerusalem, where he had gone to worship as a proselyte. He knew that Isaiah 56 had said, any eunuch who serves God will get a place in the temple. But he went up to the temple at Jerusalem and he couldn't get in. He couldn't get in because the keepers of the temple were the Sadducees. And the Sadducees was a Jewish sect that only held the first 5 books of Moses as inspired scripture. So they only know Deuteronomy 23. And Deuteronomy 23 said, he can't come in here. And he was going home. And he's reading this passage, dejected. And we're told that Philip expounded to him the scripture. And he asks a question. But he asks it expecting to get an answer that will mean he has to do something else with himself. What is there to prevent me from being baptized? He's so accustomed being rejected and left out and prevented. And Philip said, well, here's water, you may be baptized. There's no qualification. This new movement does not reject you. Why I find this story so important to reflect on at this time, sir, is because we always read Holy Scripture in context. And the book of Acts is written sometime between the decade of the 80s and 90s AD. And something monumental had happened in Rome just about 2 decades before. Long before Gabby sang "A Man Marry a Man," Emperor Nero had done it. When Emperor Nero's wife, Poppy Sabina, died, Nero wanted to find a woman that looked exactly like her. He looked throughout Rome, and then he found a little boy called Sporus. And he had Sporus transformed into a eunuch, and Nero married him. The saying in Rome at the time was, had Nero's father chosen such a wife, Rome would be much better off. But I've said that to say that was the atmosphere in which this writer of the book of Acts is writing. And he is brave enough to present this eunuchos without any qualification of who he is or what type he is. And Philip doesn't ask him anything about what type of eunuch he is. Because by that time, eunuch also meant effeminate men, men who had relationships. It embodied a whole group of people. And for me, the clarity of that story is in the ambiguity of the character. The writer makes the point, this new movement does not discriminate against anyone. All are welcome. And in fact, when a scribe later on went to do some redaction on that story, he wasn't concerned about what type of eunuch it was. That's not what he troubled. Later on, the scribe would add what is now known as Acts chapter 8 and verse 37, because the original manuscript doesn't have a verse 37. And his thing was, how can this man be baptized without professing any faith in God? And so Acts chapter 8 verse 37 says, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? And he responds, I believe, and he's baptized. But the message of the story, sir, is that there is no discrimination in this movement. The eunuch who once could not enter the assembly now finds a space. And we're told that when he came out of the water, Philip was gone, but he was happy. And lore has it that it was this eunuch who went home, converted his queen Candace, and started what is now the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. That is lore. I'm not saying this is that's what is said. That is a story of liberation. That is a story of anti-discrimination. That's what we're trying to achieve here, sir. Even for that one child, that one who genuinely has battled with everything, that one person who has tried to live according to what our society considers normal, but just realizes they do not fit into our construct of normal. It is time for us to tell them it's okay. It is okay. Especially at the time when we're begging people to follow the science. Follow the science for once. Follow the science. Mr. President, I've had so many stories. You see, part of this charter speaks to family, Article 2. We shall seek to strengthen ties between Barbadians of all ages in order to enshrine the dignity and respect for one another, understanding who children are and the critical role they have in our present and future. We shall prioritize, protect, guide, nurture, heal, and love all our children, confident that raising them with such care would provide them with an example of how to raise their own children, and in effect create the foundation for emotional, stable, and responsible citizens. We uphold family as a key institution through which our present and future generations are to be nurtured. There has recently been some talk about family. Mr. President, you know how many families have been hurt and destroyed by our discrimination. You know how many mothers and fathers and children have just sat down and cried when the child or the young person came and said, I tried. I tried. Because it is not only that person that is discriminated against, it is that parent has to grow up in a society that says, you raised that child wrong. Because many persons are talking about nurture. It's your fault that that child turned out the way it is. When the parent knows he or she has done everything. Everything to create the best possible child, and they have. In many cases, they have. They have produced respectable young men and young women. It is time for us to seriously have a discussion about what we're doing to our children, our families, and by extension, our community. When parents feel it necessary to estrange themselves from their children just to hold their place in society, just to keep their face up, as we say. Where children have to leave the only place that they've been nurtured in and feel estranged in the only society they know. Mr. President, it is only a small percentage. But that's precisely why we have anti-discrimination legislation, because it's always to protect the minority. I believe, as a nation in 2021, we can do much better. Sir, I'm no prude, because when I was growing up back in the 90s, you go in the fete and Buju Bum Bye Bye. It's playing and you're all your hand in the air and you're shouting. And then when Buju got into a little trouble, Red Dragon came and said, they vexed with me, Adrian Buju, because him sing about the Bum Bye Bye. But we don't find nothing wrong with that there, because all batty man must die. Those were the songs, and you didn't realize what you were doing. You didn't realize the fear you were instilling in people. How you were pushing people out of the society. I think we can do better. Sir, change doesn't come overnight. It took a long time for me to get to this place. I always remember Barack Obama when he was president, and he faced a similar issue. So he went home and the girls asked him, what are you talking about? What are you doing? I think that as a society, we have to face these issues head on. As I said, there'll always be those who will jump on the bandwagon for their own gratification and so on. But we have to protect that one that is genuinely struggling, that one that has experienced perhaps some of the things I spoke about here. And we have to be true, and I speak to myself as a Christian, we have to be true to our primary text that says, you may be baptized. If the church can accept the eunuch with all its vagaries, is Barbados too holy to accept persons who are struggling with their sexuality? Are we too holy a society? Be careful now, because our primary text warns us about that. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 28, passage that many like to quote, St. Paul says, God gave them over to their own desires. Women become lovers of women, and men became lovers of men. And they profaned the name of God. I don't want to hear an amen. I'm just making sure I have it, sir. And they profaned the name of God. And then he went on. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. I can hear the church saying, amen. But you see, Romans doesn't only have one chapter. It has a chapter 2. And in chapter 2 and verse 1 it says, you therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you're condemning yourself, because you pass judgment to do the same things. Romans doesn't end at Romans chapter 1. All sin falls short of the glory of God. But this is their Father's world. And every human being deserves the right to exist in freedom in their Father's world, who created them beautiful as they are. With those few words, sir, I wish to thank you for your patience in letting me go on so long. And I wish to fully support this Charter of Barbados.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Dr. Rogers. Senator Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President, and as I follow my brother, Senator Rogers, to speak on this issue, you know, sir, when it comes to the independence, you get a whimsical, sometimes philosophical approach to the debate. And when we look back as to the purpose of the Constitution, dare I say, that might have been one of the intentions of the framers of the document. And I've noted with interest the dialogue and the quotes and the references to the good book and morality and holiness and from whence we came and who we are. And I thought it prudent, sir, to perhaps bring a different angle to the debate that we're engaging in. Because it seems to be that there's a duality in which you contemplate, as has been asserted other places, a secular state and a secular nation, but then you make reference to scripture to support your contention. In my mind, sir, the entire discourse that we are seeing is much ado about a document which is premised Charter of Barbados 2021. Sir, we don't know what the document is exactly, but we know what is not, in terms of the amount of references and statements to what it is not to be. But we have it here. It represents, depending on who you ask, our highest ideals, an aim of representing the values, and I'm referencing statements made, sir, collections of the principles which bind us together, and it reflects who we are. Now, it's not stated in the context of any formal binding authority with regard to the definition, sir. And perhaps it lends itself to the name, and when we look at the historic Charter of Barbados, which may lead to a conflation of these issues, sir. The simple position is this, though, Mr. President. If statements are made that this document reflects principles which bind us together, and you assert that these are the principles under which our land is to be governed, or which reflects us, then voices which shout, "This is not who we are," must be given some cognizance. The fact is, sir, many governments have learned in their own way and in their own time that you ignore those voices at your peril. But if the document itself is non-legal and it attempts to paint the picture of a society, well, when we're painting that picture, here's another euphemism, let's look at all the palettes. But I believe, sir, that the solution to all this discourse is simply to avoid the conflation between the Charter of 2021, the Charter of Barbados, which was done in 1652, and the Constitution of Barbados and the preamble. So I intend this afternoon, sir, very briefly, to walk through the differences in the documents and perhaps propose ever so gently a way forward that recognizes the value in having the discourse, but at the same time focusing on the fact that the document seeks to do something good for the nation, and perhaps in our scrutiny we don't look at the entirety of the document and the benefits that it may bring. So, sir, my starting point this afternoon is the words of the Charter of Barbados, 1652. And we always hear about it, the Charter of Oysters. But how many of us know how this charter originated? 1652. None of us in this room at that time, let's allow ourselves the existential philosophical basis to be there, would have had any say. It was a charter which was brought into place when the Republican forces landed and buck up, for want of a better word, sir, the loyalist Barbadian led by Lord Willoughby. And there were fights, there were battles, Scottish indentured servants get drafted in, loss of life on both sides, and they had to come to an agreement. And that charter in 1652 did not represent any but one sole interest, and were the persons who were negotiating at the battle at the time. But we have held on to this charter, and we have given it a certain significance because it does speak to certain principles. And this charter says, and it's interesting because it is also reflected in our Constitution. This charter says, so as to allow the island resistance to the Republic to end, the following is stated in the preamble: that liberty of conscience in matters of religion be allowed for all. That's what it said. Liberty of conscience in matters of religion be allowed for all, except such tenets as are inconsistent to a civil government, and that laws be put in place in execution against blasphemy, atheism, open scandalous living, seditious preaching, or unsound doctrine sufficiently proved against him. This is what the charter says that we reflect in our Constitution. So all the atheists go on through, according to the charter that we have cited. How many of us have read it? How many of us have considered these words? So we can't be selective in our outrage to one word in a document in 2021 and yet not recognize the history from whence we came and where these words are derived. And my goodness, how far we have come. How far we have come, sir. Sir, in the preamble to the Constitution, after reciting and making reference to the Charter of 1652, it stipulates, now therefore the people of Barbados proclaim that they are a sovereign nation founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God. There's no touching that. There is no touching that. So we have a document called Charter of Barbados 2021. We have a document called Charter of Barbados 1652, which says some interesting things, sir. And we have a constitution with a preamble which is extremely clear of the supremacy of this nation and recognizing the supremacy of God. As far as I'm concerned, sir, the talk done. This, sir, remains the most sacred document, sir, the grand norm, the height of the law within this land. And we can talk and we can parade and we could gestate and we could theist everything. It does not change the law of this land. The fact is, sir, the Constitution trumps all, and the courts are there to make sure that that remains the case. But the issue that we find ourselves having to debate, sir, perhaps stems from the fact that there remains this uncertainty or lack of clarity with regard to the role of the Charter in terms of the development of the nation and what role it may play in a future constitution or in a future preamble to the said constitution. So persons express concern. All I say in that regard, sir, is that perhaps we are a bit judgmental if we are too strong in the attacks that we do to persons who express concern about this document. Indeed, it may be that we are expressing and asserting the same form of prejudice that we say the Charter speaks against. And sir, any ideals that are put forward, and it's a lovely document, and we haven't gone in, I mean, the leader of government business today did her job in terms of referencing, but it's a beautiful document in terms of what the articles seek. And it is a document which should be discussed and held up, and we must thank Senator Rogers and the others who have served in having it compiled and those who made the contributions. But what is ironic, sir, is that we are here debating the Charter and talking about certain statements made, but we don't look at what the actual Charter says in relation to those statements at Article 3. It says, sir, every Barbadian has the right and duty to participate in the economic, political, and social life of Barbados as an expression of active citizenship. So an expression of active citizenship could be that I don't like the Charter. This is what we say are the values. When you seek to tell somebody who they are, they might disagree with you. And you have to accept that in a democracy, such discourse should not be shouted down. But I say, sir, such discourse should be encouraged. At the end of the day, Mr. President, the document should be viewed in the light of the ideals and recognize how far it comes from the other charter, sir. And go back and look at the Charter of 1652 and look at the Charter of 2021, and you will see, sir, how far we have come. There will always be issues. There will always be need of correction and perfection, sir. But my goodness, we are trying and we are seeking to move forward to make a better country. Hopefully, this charter would play a part, but in recognizing what we seek to do, if we are encouraging active citizenry, when comments are made and criticism is made against you, let's see what we can learn from them and move forward as a nation. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Senator Dr. Springer.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to speak and to lend my voice to this debate on the Charter of Barbados 2021. Mr. President, we live in a time of great turmoil, one marked by a pandemic, a deepening economic crisis, and a rapidly changing climate. But moments of existential crisis sometimes bear opportunities for us to reimagine new possibilities that provide opportunities for us to create more equitable, open, and sustainable societies, Mr. President. ones that are focused on community, cooperation, and respect for all. And I think in some ways, Mr. President, this Charter of Barbados proposes to do just that. As recently as yesterday, Mr. President, a young man in my community, he asked me, very young man, he wasn't even 21, he asked me what was a charter. And I gave him a definition, I gave him the dictionary definition, which is that it's a formal document describing the rights, aims, or principles of an organization or a group of people. But he also went on to explain that the Charter of Barbados is even more than that. It's a continuation of a national project, Mr. President, which outlines the basic rights and responsibility of our people. Some historians may say that it would have started as far back as the establishment of a Barbados Parliament in 1639, when we had to make a case for statehood. I would have continued with the Charter of Barbados made it at Oistins in 1652 that my colleague just made reference to. And also continue with the struggles for independence in the 1960s. And today, even continues as we move towards full political independence, Mr. President, in the form of a republic. Mr. President, well, we were able to have, and it's documented, uninterrupted parliament sittings and elections where persons were able to exercise their democratic rights. I believe that that journey still continues, and there are still some goals and some other achievements that other aspirations that we still, we're still working towards. We still have to achieve. In the conversation, I pretty much said that perhaps the more simple language, but that was pretty much the essence of what I was talking about when I spoke to that young man yesterday. That this charter is an ongoing project. Key among those goals that we as a people, we have, and we're working towards, is sovereignty, democracy, justice, and development. These goals were valid in the beginning, and they remain just as valid today, just as valid as ever. And in pursuing these goals and aspirations, Mr. President, we are fully aware that we are now operating in a global community. So we have to think of ourselves as agents or as actors with the right to exercise that agency. And when I use the word agency, I mean that right to make your own decisions, that capacity of free choice and making independent choices and decisions. This charter represents, Mr. President, a deliberate act on the part of this government to engage not only at the national level, but within the international system. And to my mind, it is an example of us exercising that capacity as a people to act independently and make free choices, Mr. President. That's where we're going. Developing that capacity, building that capacity to continue to make good, free choices that impact our people. speaks to a cohesive and a consistent line of argument. The whole idea of speaking with one voice and sharing the same values and hopes and goals for our future as a people. The language of the Charter, Mr. President, speaks to who we are as a people, what we want as a people, Mr. President, and how we exercise our autonomy, our freedom to achieve our objectives. If we were to look to history, Mr. President, we will see that many who would have preceded us were denied the very basic rights and freedoms that we all enjoy today, Mr. President. They were excluded in every sense. And while we have taken the step to reimagine ourselves and chart our future, we've also taken the opportunity to ensure that going forward, every Barbadian is afforded the opportunity, Mr. President, to enjoy those rights and freedoms regardless of their circumstances. Regardless of their circumstances. I believe it was the philosopher George Santayana who said in 1905, he was credited as saying that, and I quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." He was credited with this, but many world leaders would have used that quote at different times. And there's a reason why that particular quote is used. And that's because it remains true today, just as true as it was when it was first uttered. Those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it, Mr. President. And Mr. President, we are now in a position in 2021 to learn from our ancestors many valuable lessons. Because I'm sure, and we talk about this charter, I'm sure that back in 1652, the framers of the Charter of Barbados, they did not take into consideration people like me, and people like you, and people like some of the voices that we're hearing out there in this space. Even though we might have been the majority at the time. They didn't care anything about us. They didn't solicit our views. They didn't consult with us because we didn't matter. We weren't important. And today, we have the opportunity, to right that historical wrong by ensuring that all groups within society, whether majority or minority groups, in groups or out groups, as we would call them in school, that these groups were protected, covered, that no longer would persons be subject to discrimination and othering, as you would say in the academic space. Making those persons feel like they're others, they're us, and they're the others. Now, Mr. President, have we achieved all the goals and aspirations in terms of our development that we would have had perhaps since our independence? Have we gotten everything right every time? I would say no, Mr. President. But as I said before, it's an ongoing project. But if there's one thing that I am sure of, if we are to move forward as a progressive nation, is that we cannot abandon those goals and those aspirations of our ancestors. We cannot. Not if we are to go forward, Mr. President. That's why I support even the robust defense of this charter, because we know what we would have been through. Some persons are just thinking about the now, but you have to look sometimes in the past to get a proper understanding of what may very well happen in the future. Mr. President, at this time I want to take a little time to examine some of the paragraphs that were actually mentioned in the charter, because there's some things that that are dear to me. In Article 3, it says that every Barbadian has the right and a duty to participate in the economic, political, and social life of Barbados as an expression of active citizenship. Mr. President, as a democracy, I will give credit where it's due. We have had a strong history of protecting and promoting democracy. We have had that. The Charter recognizes this, and it's grounded in democratic principles. That's right. It speaks to human rights and a commitment to active citizenship. Perfect. And I would also make the argument that Barbados, and indeed the region, the Caribbean, especially Anglophone Caribbean, are usually not, included in conversations about rampant anti-democratic practices. We're not part of that grouping. And part of this might have been because of the allegiances to institutionalized systems by those persons who came before us and were responsible for the running of state affairs. You have no difficulty with that, because those systems would have served us well in the past, but like everything else, Mr. President, in life, we have to adapt to changing times. And these are changing times. And at some point, we may very well have to discard this blind allegiance to old systems, old colonial systems, and reimagine a future by looking beyond what we are accustomed to and embracing new horizons. I may dare say, Mr. President, that this charter provides us with a roadmap or a framework to those new horizons. As I said, there are certain things that I particularly like, and these things usually fall under history or culture. So I'm just going to touch that briefly as I wrap up, because I don't intend to speak much longer. In the charter, it speaks to a commitment to the protection of our land, air, marine environment, and in particular our gullies and coral reefs through progressive public policy which support education, research, and innovation, leading to their regeneration for the benefit of all. I think it was Monday I had the opportunity to speak at a tree planting ceremony. It was a celebration of the victorious St. Andrew team, regathering team in Canada, which won first prize for their depiction of their parish, one best parish, something like that. When I saw the depiction, when I saw the display, it reflected, I guess, the upbringing that they would have had in St. Andrew, where there was greenery, it showed the hills, the valley, and it showed some of our built architecture. It showed the Morgan Lewis windmill. And we know our history has been traumatic, but that does not mean that we do not celebrate our built heritage. And I think that is captured in this charter, this celebration of our natural environment. And I said it on Monday, I will say it again, that part of Barbados, the Scotland area, St. Andrew, represents perhaps the best example of pristine Barbados, of beautiful Barbados in its most pristine form. I think that when we leave these shores, we travel overseas for a long period of time, when we think back of Barbados, we think of the pristine Barbados of the beautiful fields and hills and valleys and greenery. You know, we would never use a Hudson Terrace to depict Barbados. It's always that green area. That's why I think it is important that we protect those spaces, because at some point, if we continue, then there's a possibility that our children and our grandchildren may not be able to see or know what beautiful Barbados looks like, what green spaces look like. And we've seen that in some parts of the world where whole areas have been urbanized, converted into concrete jungles, and you have to create artificial green spaces. So it's important that we impress on our people the importance of preserving those green spaces, Mr. President. I'm glad that someone had the foresight, had the clarity of thought and clarity of mind to have that inserted in this charter, because it's very important. And you may not see it now, but 50 years from now, when looking back, when there's no Kim Fields or gullies or open areas and things, we would say we probably should have done more to protect these spaces, Mr. President. And there's one other thing that I want to touch on quickly. I'm going to read an excerpt from the charter before I make that comment. It says, we commit to expressing our Barbadian culture and heritage and our values with unbridled confidence. And I'm going to stick right there. There was something interesting to me within the charter that might have been missed by many. But because of my linguistic background, it piqued my interest. And that was the use of the word Beijing within the preamble. I saw two references of Beijing within the charter. And the explanation given for the use of Beijing as opposed to Barbadian was that Beijing spoke to a deeper meaning, a deeper reflection of who we are as a people in terms of our culture and our values of way of life. The word Beijing, our language, everything was Beijing. In the psyche of the Barbadian, we have a closer relationship with the word Beijing than, let's say, Barbadian. Yet, for some reason, the word Beijing still languishes in that subcategory of Barbadian or Beijing colloquialisms. Now, the linguists among us will say to you that the word Beijing is derived from Barbadian through the loss of the initial syllable, which is a feature of Caribbean languages, and the palatization of the D to je, to make it Beijing as opposed to Barbadian. We've heard some people say Barbadian at some point in time, but we would have dropped that initial syllable. They just leave the bar and just continue with the Bajan. And this was all done for ease of pronunciation. For those persons who found it difficult to say Barbadian. Regardless of the etymology, Mr. President, the fact of the matter is that over time we have created a new lexical item, a new word that is now a part of our lexicon. A noun, an adjective that's used to describe us. And I think, for me, when I travel overseas, I say I'm a Bajan. And when I hear people talk about Bajan, I feel proud. I have no difficulty using that word, Bajan, to describe who I am and who we all are. We're Bajans. I think going forward in our new republic, we have a duty to, in terms of preserving our cultural and linguistic heritage, to embrace those words that are of our own creation. There are not many words that we have added to the global lexicon, to the Anglophone language, to the English language, sorry. But this is our opportunity to give them a word. It's not a word that we're ashamed of. I'm sorry. It's not a word that we have to feel bad about. It's a beautiful word that somehow over time we as Bajans have come to accept. And for some reason in the international space, they seem to prefer to call us Bajans as opposed to Barbadians. That word should be codified. And I believe that being part of this extremely formal document will be an important step in embracing the word Bajan as a proper adjective for the people of this nation. I will conclude by stating what I said pretty much at the beginning, and certainly repeating the words in the preamble of this charter. And that is, this charter is a reaffirmation of our values, our goals, our aspirations as a people. Speaks to who we are, who we want to be. And I want to fully associate myself with it, and the words of my colleagues who, so far, from what I've heard, seem to support what we are doing here. I fully endorse this charter, Mr. President, and with those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Springer. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think, sir, perhaps more than any other year since our independence, this one has been one that we approached with a wide discussion about the kind of country, the kind of society, indeed the kind of republic that will come into being in the next few days that we want to see, and indeed what we want to leave to our children. So this charter has clearly played a part in sparking that debate, and that debate's been lively. I think at times it's gone a little beyond the pale, but if we don't bring passion and belief to these kind of discussions, really what are we doing here? We're just expressing our love of country, and even when we disagree with one another, I think that is a necessary step we have to take. There are those clearly who view change with some, or the potential for change with some trepidation. And they ask themselves the question, I think, entirely fairly, are my values here being challenged or eroded? Am I being demoted in my position in society? Change always has this impact, I think. People must ask questions. That is right. But, sir, there's always another angle to this, and that is, what if there's no change? There are those who are sitting there who fear inertia. They may be asking, how much longer do I have to continue feeling as though I'm a second-class citizen in my country? You know, what do I have to do to have my own values respected more than they are at the moment? I think Reverend Rogers gave a welcome and very detailed example of what segments of our society might be posing those questions. Because I don't think this, and I don't want to be misunderstood, I don't think this is merely about one particular constituency in our country making a lot of noise and being unhappy. These are things that apply to us universally. And where each of us sits today and our level of comfort as things currently stand, I can nearly guarantee you that 50 or 100 years down the road, those positions will have changed, and we'll be happy, I think, at that point, for all the kind of protections that I will come on to in a moment are actually in place. That chasm between people who are trepidation, or feel trepidation about change, and those who would like change, I think this charter goes some way to starting a discussion as to how we bridge that gap. When I read through it all the way, 12 pages, including, well, excluding the comments, which were on, I think, another 8 or 9, I said to myself, you know, what is the, as many people have done, what is the overarching goal of this document? And indeed, what is the direction we want this republic to take? What is the question that's being answered by this document? And, sir, the answer is in our history, most certainly, but it's articulated, that history, in the very first article set out in this charter. Now, Senator Reverend Rogers read this out. I'm going to do it again so it's fresh in our minds. And it goes like this: all Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity and right, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, faith, class, culture and educational background, ability, sex, gender, or sexual orientation. I'm gonna add here, sir, that you can't spend, as I've done, nearly 2 decades in France and not recognize that this article is very, very heavily indebted to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, especially the first 13 words. And in fact, all the words that follow that word right, age, race, ethnicity, faith, right down to sexual orientation, they all struck a chord with me in that they could be chapter headings for our history, but they're all dependent on the first 13 words. And those words are that all Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity and right. If we can't agree that, because that is the fundamental contract that's being proposed here, if we can't agree that, well, this charter can't stand. The republic that we want to have consultations on cannot either. And indeed, sir, I would say that that would be illogical. It would be an affront to our history if we can't agree that that article, those first 13 words, really encapsulate everything about the Barbados we inhabit today. All the episodes, the full journey we've been on that have brought us to that place really flow from this belief that all Barbadians are born free and equal in human dignity and right. Sir, indeed, that we are born free and equal underlies the symbolic justification. And I think people have made light of this, but the symbolic justification that drove us to, at last, make a Barbadian our head of state in a way that was no longer de jure, but actually de facto. We're recognizing that formally. And we're doing so in a way that further recognizes that we're still on this road to emancipating ourselves from any sort of tutelage or subservience such that we've encountered in the past. And that past, that history, sir, even as abbreviated in the 12 chapters, in the 12 pages of this charter, is one long cautionary tale on the powers, the corrosive destructive, divisive powers that exist when we are run essentially by an oligarchy or a series of oligarchies who manage to dominate the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. That's really what our history has been about. We've had different oligarchies at different times, most notably, and the one that has fired the crucible that's formed us with the greatest heat has been an oligarchy of race. We all know a lot about that. We've had an oligarchy of gender. It's been said here that I think women's rights weren't fully codified in law really until the second half of the last century. We've had an oligarchy of capital, for sure, that stems out of the first oligarchy of race that led to an unequal distribution of assets and income in this country, and vestiges of that, of course, still remain, and that has been touched on also. And we've had an oligarchy of the educated, insofar as, until very recently, education at the primary and secondary and even the tertiary school level was not accessible by the masses of people. And certainly we've had oligarchies of creed at different times in our history, where if you did not think like the establishment, well, you were going to be excluded from the establishment. And finally, sir, and perhaps most pertinently for the way the conversation is going at the moment, we have in the past had oligarchies of religion. I don't intend to make this a speech about religion, but I will point to, I don't know that it's that well known by younger Barbadians, but the Anglican Church Act of 1969 that disestablished the Anglican Church as the church of the state. And effectively, that did not mean there was a formal division between what is secular and what is spiritual, but it did mean that the state no longer was going to provide the financing to one institution on behalf of every Barbadian who might not have been a member of that institution anymore. So I raise these points and these examples because I want to argue that as each of those oligarchies has been diminished, reduced, changed, sometimes even completely eliminated, it is almost undeniable by all but the most foolhardy to say that we collectively as a people have grown to exercise our free will, to think a little bit more for ourselves with each year that passes, to try and seek truth through reason and not necessarily accepting it without question when it's given to us by a master or a leader, whether that master or leader is temporal or spiritual. These changes have taken a long time to happen, but they're there, and I think the consultative process that was described by Senator Rogers really shows that to be true. What we've been doing, sir, over the past 4 centuries is we've been doing our best to move from the ideal that we're all born free and equal to the reality. Now, we're not in a state of perfection, I think, by any means. But when we ask why do we want to go to a republic, you cannot ask that question in isolation. You have to look at this journey that we've been on and that we continue to be on. Sir, let me put a question to you. From your perch, and it's sort of a semi-rhetorical question, from your perch, all of us knowing our history, knowing where we've come from, knowing the past in particular, if you had a time machine and you could go back and be dropped upon some arc of our history, you don't know where it would be. Once you found yourself there, what would you change? Let me give you another detail. Let's suppose you're dropped in Barbados society the back end of the 18th century, 1790 something. What would you do? Well, I think the answer depends a lot on what role you found yourself dropped into. Have you arrived as an enfranchised, wealthy, rich, wealthy and rich is the same thing, spiritual planter or merchant, really at the top of the pole? Or are you slightly lower down, a clergyman? Or perhaps you're a free-colored woman, you're a child, are you a Christian, are you a Jew, are you an unbeliever? most likely you'd end up as a slave in this. So that is the balance of probability. But what would you do, knowing what you know now, to change the society you were dropped into? Well, sir, even if you were at the top of the pole and you went down to the House of Assembly and you sat with the other wealthy white planters, and you said to them, well, you know, boys, I had this revelation last night. You know, it occurred to me that all Barbadians are born free and equal. You know, and I think we would do well to change every single statute we've got on the books, change our entire way of thinking and system to make that a reality. You'd be laughed out of the place. That would be a good result, at best. Sir, the chains of the past, whether they're real or metaphorical, is what has meant it's taken so long to get to where we are. We know that now. So let me turn the question slightly different, turn it around a little bit. Now you still got the time machine, but this time you're looking to the future. And it's not you that travels this time. It's your child, or my child, or the child of any one of us in here. They're going to get in this machine, land in the future, you don't know where, and you don't know what their endowments will be. You don't know if it's going to be a boy or a girl. You don't know if they're going to be rich or poor. You don't know if they're Christian, Jew, Muslim. You don't know if they're intelligent. In fact, you know very little. You don't know even who they will fall in love with. What you do know is you want the best for this child because it's yours, it's ours, it's everybody's. So when you start thinking in this way, you realize how important it is to try and set your own personal circumstances that you know so well from the present, including your biases, including the weight you put in the way you run and exercise your own life. Because now you're talking about a situation where you really don't know where this child that you care so much about is going to end up with. So if I then ask the question, what, in these circumstances, is the country, the society, the republic that you want to see come to pass? You're now looking at it through a different set of eyes. I'd suggest, sir, that this charter, whether you agree with everything in it or not, is a pretty good starting point for envisaging that eventual society that this child will find itself in. Because we're going to want a set of structures that bestows fairness, compassion, equality, and even redresses where inequality exists. Whatever one's starting position, white, black, sexual orientation, what have you. So it's been said here, and it struck me, that at least 3 senators have thought the same thing. We know what the past looks like. We know what the present looks like. But we don't know what the future looks like. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. One guarantee is that it won't look like the present. It won't look like the past. It never has. And I think in those circumstances, the only society that I would like to see my child, our collective child I refer to, grow up in is one where the state, the republic, the constitution is able to mediate harmoniously between the diversity of interests that we already know exists. And this is, you know, this is not fixed. This diversity grows and will grow more. It'll grow in ways that we can't even imagine at the moment. You know, it's a little bit like election results. You know, what goes around comes around. At the moment, you may be in power, you might feel good, but down the road, that will change. And you'll be happy when it does, if your republic is the guarantor, the protector, and the promoter of equal rights for everybody. That it's brought us closer to that reality that we want to see, that all Barbadians are born free and equal in human dignity and right. Now, sir, another thing strikes me in our debate today is it's been relatively abstract and philosophical. And yet this fundamental principle that I think underlies everything we've been talking about also underlies every single policy that we've discussed in our time in this chamber together, and indeed every piece of legislation that's come through here. When we talk about a pipeline carrying water from Vineyard and St. Philip to Beaumiston Station and servicing the 3 northern parishes in this country in a way that they've never previously enjoyed before, we're talking about a problem that's existed for many, many, many years. Where now, those citizens who have access to that water are being treated freely, as being born free, and of equal right to everybody else. And I'm going to select, of course, things that this government has done, but it's true throughout the ages. When we have fixed the sewage problem, it's also with that fundamental principle and right in mind. When we've made investments in public transport, increased public sector wages, increased old age pension, when we made changes to the tax code, we may not always agree with all these changes, but I challenge anyone to say that they've been done without this principle in mind, that we're all born free and equal of human dignity and right. Sir, I'm not really a shouter. I think I actually had to increase the volume just now because I was told I couldn't be heard. But if I was going to shout about something, it's that if we fail to recognize what's driven this country throughout its history is this quest for freedom and equality, we're really doing a disservice to our forefathers and everything they fought for. Forefathers includes foremothers. And I think if we don't, and I've got little fear of this now, I've heard so many senators speak about it, but if we don't continue on that journey and try to persuade everybody who is doubtful, who is fearful, everybody who feels left out, that we're still loyal to this idea of freedom and equality, well, I think we'll be condemned by history, and rightly so, as hypocrites. We must realize, as I said earlier, what goes around comes around. If we cannot have a society that cares for all and sundry, no matter what their position in that society is, the state cannot promote equality, be faithful to this fundamental principle here, we're on the wrong path. We've never been on the wrong path. Sometimes we might have taken a small wrong turn. But I think everybody's interest since independence certainly has been to fulfill the reality of this ideal. If this charter isn't a good way to start, I don't know what is. We don't have to agree at all. We have to discuss it. But bear in mind, that's what we're aiming at. We're not trying to favor or grant advantage to anyone, just the opposite. We have to make sure that the place we leave for our children down the road honors this principle. Sir, I'm equally surprised in a good way and impressed at the work that's been done by Senator Rogers and his colleagues in producing this. I think many Barbadians who are not inclined to take out full-page ads in the newspaper to complain or to voice their concerns will be pleasantly surprised at the nature of the debate that's gone on. Everybody can be heard. This is a fair and equal society we're trying to build. And I commend it to the House. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Adams. His Honour Senator Greenwich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise and at the same time, sir, I look at my watch because I will endeavor to make sure that my speech does not go over 5 minutes. Mr. President, this 2021 Charter sets out the vision for who we want to be as Barbadians. As I went through the Charter, sir, I said to myself, this charter seems to be sending us a message. And the charter seems to be saying, I may be words, but I am not just a matter of words. It is not just about rattling off words. This is about how we actually live our lives today and tomorrow. And therefore, sir, I see this charter as being performance-driven. Not only about what you say, but more importantly, about what you do as a Barbadian. In a way, sir, this charter is a challenge to Barbadians to do that which is right. Yes, it is a pledge, but a pledge to live our lives the right way, not just to talk, but to perform. To live our lives in that exemplary Barbadian way. Mr. President, persons in St. Lucia, persons in St. Vincent, persons in Grenada, even in the little Turks and Caicos Islands, they have all said to me at one time or another, my country is the best in the Caribbean. They have all said to me at one stage, my country is the best in the world. So by simply reciting words, we are not being exceptional if all we think of the charter would be the words. What we need to do, sir, is to put in the work to prove who or what we are. I do believe, sir, that sometimes the best testimonial we can get for ourselves come from those who visit us. Those who say, and they have no other reason to say, those who say to us, Barbados is the best place on earth. Those who say, Barbados is my second home. Those who say, there's no place like Barbados. And most importantly, when those comments come from those who say this, because of the way they were treated, because of the way they were welcomed, because of the way they were assisted by Barbadians. Those who say this, because they witness how loving, how caring, how honest we are as a people. And I have to say too, Mr. President, at the same time, that it hurts me when I hear Barbadians say, and say for mere political reasons, sending messages abroad on the internet and so on, that this country is on the brink of destruction, and that this country is hostile towards workers, and that this country has a government who looks out for its friends. Some of us, Mr. President, do more harm as Barbadians, some of us, to this good country of ours. But I have to say that it hurts even more sometimes, or hurts just as much, when I hear our visitors say that because of bad experiences, they are not coming back to Barbados. And it hurts to make reference to this particular example of who we should not be. And I say so because the example I'm going to give, this is not who we are. I live at the eastern tip of this island. in the East Point area. And there are, I recall, when there were two fellows in that particular vicinity who used to make it their business to lay wait near the lighthouse for the visitors who were traveling in their mini mokes and their hired cars. And when those tourists alighted from their vehicles and they walked on the cliff and on the sea ledge to look at the beautiful big beach and the beautiful spring bay in those places, that those fellows would remove the items from the vehicles. And they took out the handbags, and they took out the purses, and they removed the money. And they ran off, and sometimes they would throw away the handbags and the purses in the bushes, and there was a well or two. And sir, what they were throwing away would have been things like the credit cards and the passports. And sometimes when the tourists began to cry and so on, when they came around and they came down the road and started chatting to people, and they would say they didn't mind the money. It's not the money, so it is the passport, it is the credit card, it is the things inside the purse that they miss and they want more than anything else. And that used to hurt me. I hurt very badly when the tourists came and they complained. And I would hope that as from today, that kind of criminal activity be put behind us when it comes to the way in which we welcome and treat visitors to this country. Mr. President, I would like us to live our lives in a way that fellow Barbadians and visitors alike will be in unison when they say we live in a country where you can walk the streets without fear, a country in which you can feel safe, a country where there's very little crime. I would love to hear them say, sir, that this is a country where there is no discrimination because of the color of your skin, no discrimination because of class or because of religion, a country where there's no gender discrimination, a country where there's no discrimination because of sexual orientation. And as Senator Rogers said, a country where all are welcome. Remember, sir, we must not only talk about recognizing the rights of minorities, we must recognize them, not just the talk. It is performance driven. We must recognize them. In the Charter, we have vowed, Mr. President, to embrace all persons, and we must, in our living, do just that. Mr. President, during the pandemic, I recall that Trinidadians were turned away from Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. President, do you remember who took them in? Mr. President, I remember cruise ships. Some of them had no place to anchor. Mr. President, do you remember who took them in? This was performance driven. And Mr. President, we were praised for our deeds. And to our credit, ship captains held us up to the world as a responsible people of exceptional character. And as I close, Mr. President, my 5 minutes are up. Let us, by our living, continue to bring credit to this nation, not only here, but wherever we may go. I'm thankful to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Greenwich. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to have a short intervention and participate in this debate. I must first confess, sir, that I, and as it turns out, mistakenly, probably thought that this charter would have at some point formed the basis for the preamble, if not the entire charter as it is written. It would have been the basis on which a preamble would find itself into the Constitution, the new Constitution of Barbados, when it is discussed and articulated and all the rest of it over the course of the next, of the coming months. But I was wrong. But the thing is that what I find is that this charter, which is such a good document, I think, because it captures all of the things which I think as a country we would want to see for ourselves, for our government, for our people. It covers and it captures the desires, as I think was so eloquently discussed by Senator Rogers. So and I'm wondering to myself, having done all of this, what do we do with this charter, having acknowledged it? What do we do with it? Do we frame it and put it up on the wall and look at it? Is it'll be filed away somewhere? How does it get into, how do we use it to ensure that all of these aspirations, all of our desires, all our values which you have captured in here find their way into the use and the development of this country that we love and cherish. I don't know why it's not going to be part of it's not going to become eventually a legal document. I would have thought that perhaps it could have been, that this charter could have been part of and included in the Constitution when it is finalized. I know, for example, Canada has its Bill of Rights and Freedoms, a similar thing, a very similar document, which is their charter, but it is part of the Canadian Constitution. And it is in fact important because all of the values and the ideals and so on which are captured in there, because it is in the Constitution, it creates the legal framework in which when any laws are being framed, you then have to make sure that such laws are consistent with the Bill of Rights, and they don't violate any of those rights and freedoms which have been effectively enshrined into the Constitution. And I would have wished to see that that aspect of it in the Constitution, so that it becomes, so that there's a certain legality about the document. It is to my mind a living, or it should be a living document. Obviously, it is going to have to be subjected to review as we go forward. As we know, the world changes, certain values evolve. As Senator Rogers, in his discourse, for example, gave us a very long discourse, beautiful, about sexual orientation, and he went into that in some detail. But the point I'm making is that over time, as precepts, as concepts, as values, as aspirations change and evolve with our young people, we will have to review, I would have thought, this document and bring it up to the modern times that exist in the future. And this is why I suppose there may be some difficulties with the use of Creator, the use of God, which would have been enshrined into the Constitution at different periods. But I believe that area of discussion is too high for me, and I will not venture there. I leave that for the more, for those who are more competent in that area. Mr. President, as I read through the charter, there were just a few little things that I thought about, and one of them in particular which was enshrined in under the article, I believe it was Article 2, which speaks to the fact that we affirm that our single greatest responsibility of one to another is to safeguard and protect the dignity of our common humanity, to be the true keeper of our brothers and sisters, especially the elderly, youth, differently able, the incapacitated, and other vulnerable people in our society. And I just wanted to spend a brief moment there, Mr. President, because I think that a little more meat could have been expressed in terms of how we treat to the differently able. And I was glad to hear Senator Rogers say that it is in his going around, and he did meet with the people, the differently able community. But it does not, to my mind, sufficiently capture what we need to see for the aspirations, as our aspirations for that part of our community. And I do not think that they should be left out, but they must be brought along with us. They must be brought along, and we need to be able to provide the framework and that is necessary to see that group of our community develop and have this, and be able to realize and actualize the same aspirations and so on of all other people. For example, we've had a few who have been able to make it through. Mr. President, you will recall, of course, that a former president of the Senate was actually visually impaired person. And there were one or two others who have made it and who are making it. But I think that in this charter we could have been given a more stronger, something which seems to me to be a more stronger commitment to that part of our community. Proper access to schools. Up to this day, there are very few schools that are friendly for differently abled people. A few have made it through, but it needs to be an area where, as we move forward, we see to it that we are providing or even giving them, where necessary, more than others in order to see that they realize their true potential also. The other area that I just wanted to touch on briefly as well is the area of youth. Again, mentioned briefly in the document, but I think that if we accept that Barbados' future rests with its youth, and that their commitments and contributions are going to be necessary in order to take this country forward in the future, then I think we could have been much stronger in this charter about how we are going to treat to the youth. It seems to me we need to be investing and promoting youth development, through the creation of the necessary opportunities for employment, for entrepreneurship, etc. After they've gone through school for a number of years, they've gone through university, and they come out, and then they're unable to find a job, or even if they find a job, a job which is commensurate with the education that they have received. And I think that this is something that in our charter, and as we as a people look forward and aspire to this greatness that we wish to see in Barbados, that we must make sure that our youth are properly taken care of. All of the statistics within recent times show that, for example, nearly all of the ground crimes, for example, have been committed by our young people under the ages of 35, for example, between the teen ages, 18 and so on, up to about 35. We have come to the situation where and I'm sure that we have heard this, that this is almost a lost generation. We are losing too many of our youth to all of the various gun crimes, to illegal drugs, to all of the other issues. And I think that is an area that should really be strongly emphasized in our charter, and we make sure that whatever government needs to do and to provide for our youth is put in place, so that we do not lose this generation, which is so integral and so important to our continued development. Mr. President, an area that I frequently touch on when I have the opportunity in here, and I am looking at, still under Article 2, but on social partnerships. We commit to working towards a more efficient and more transparent public sector that places our citizens, residents, and visitors at the center of service delivery, which meets their expectations and facilitates the equitable growth and development of our country. Mr. President, we recognize, I would say that I would like to see us recognizing the importance of information and communications technologies as a fundamental instrument of development. And I know, because I've given her kudos in the past, Senator McConney, for the work she's doing in that area. And I would wish to see that development continue, and that to be, as I said, a serious part of our aspirations as we go forward in the future. And it must not only be in government, but it must be in the private sector as well, and into education, in the area of education, and the promotion of learning by these new technologies. And I would like to see much more. It really has been forced on us in some way because of the advent of COVID over the last few years, where we recognize that we have to be more efficient and to use the technologies available in order to continue to compete and to keep up, and to continue to provide the services at a level that is acceptable to our people and to our visitors. Another area that I would have liked to see some mention of, Mr. President, in the document, is the question of our legal systems. I think we have to, we all accept, or most of us would accept, that the systems, the legal systems, have to be fixed. We have recognized over the past few years the admonishments that we have been given from our highest courts, the CCJ, within recent times, because of our tardiness in delivering justice. And I would like to think, Mr. President, that as part of this charter and as part of it go forward, we must be aspiring, and it must be one of the areas in which we recognize that we have to quickly bring up to date to deliver justice not only swiftly and in a reasonable time frame. I was appalled recently, fairly recently, Mr. President, to discover a case which was in the daily press, of a convict who had been sentenced to stay at the psychiatric hospital. And this is over, I think it was over 10 years, and nobody remembered him. He was completely forgotten. There's no records in the courts or the registry. There's no records in the prosecutor's office. There's no records at the psychiatric hospital about this individual. In fact, I think there were 2 individuals that were mentioned. But this cannot be in the Barbados that we envision and that we are generating this charter, that we've generated this charter, and we see this vision, and we see our hopes and aspirations, and yet this is the level of justice that exists currently, and we have got to do better. And I think that it would have been good if that aspect were to have been captured in this charter, because as I said, I think this is an area especially that needs swift and urgent attention. There's just one other area that I will touch on very briefly, Mr. President, and that is in the area of environment, sustainable development, and resilience. And I was glad to see that quite an extensive chapter was done pertaining to that area, because it is an area we have to take seriously. We have in all forms and fashions and ways degraded our environment, and we cannot continue if we are aspiring to leave, as it's suggested here, a Barbados which is good and wholesome for future generations. We cannot destroy our planet like that. And it pains me when I see, and for years we've been reading about squatters living on government's lands right in our water zones, protection zones. The same zones, water zones, where we want to be able to guarantee good water supplies, good health to all our citizens, which we pledge and we are committing to in this document. And so we have to be able to cut out and to stop, and politicians must understand that they must not find excuses for those who will do wrong because they may be in their particular constituency or for some other reason. We have got to recognize the greater good. We have got to recognize that this country must be for all Barbadians and not for a few, or not for a few, not for a few, and that we cannot be selfish about such areas of our environment that are absolutely important to all of us. So, Mr. President, I have no difficulty other than the few areas I've raised with this charter. I would only wish to, as I suggested, that it would have been in some way enshrined into and form part of our Constitution. But that is not to be the case, it seems, and government, I suppose, has it, I presume, has its reasons for not so doing. But I trust that wherever is necessary, we will still, in order to be able to see these aspirations come to fruition, that whenever it is necessary, if there is any legislation that is required in order to see it happen, that we will not shy away from bringing it to Parliament and making sure that we reach these goals for which we all aspire. With these few words, I am obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no intention of certainly not on this occasion. So I just want to lend my voice in support of the Charter. I believe that this is a worthwhile document. It speaks to, in my view, values. It speaks to how we should see ourselves as Barbadians. I believe, sir, that that is very important, particularly in giving our younger people a sense and an understanding of what it means to be Barbadian. Of course, I'm sure that we have referenced in this Senate before Barbados of yesteryear. There was a time when persons in the village left and went to town, left the homes opened, and had absolutely no fear or concern about anyone going into their houses. And therefore, I think that this charter, in a very strong way, communicates how we should treat each. I think, sir, that might be a signal to me to keep to the faith of what I have said, and that is to keep my presentation short. But I do believe, sir, that this is an important document which we all should support. There are, though, sir, some comments that I find compelled to make because of discussions that have been taking place. And one of those, sir, relates to the issue of the use of the word creator. And I'm not a theologian, sir. I'm not going to delve into that area in a very serious way. And I think that Senator Dr. Rogers spoke in great length with respect to that, both in this chamber and outside. But I am of the view, sir, that a fundamental and foundational element of the Bible is that God is the creator of all things. The Bible that all Christians, as far as I am aware, utilize, whatever version of the Bible it is, a fundamental and foundational element of that is that God is the creator of all that exists. I therefore, sir, must confess that I have difficulty in understanding what the issue is with using the word creator. I do not believe, sir, that it devalues in any way the perspective of any religion. I remember, sir, as a youngster, there was a dub artist by the name of Big Youth, I believe the name was. He used to sing a song called Isaiah, First Prophet of Old. And I remember, sir, myself singing the words of that song. And of course, sir, Isaiah was one of the first prophets. He would have, if I'm correct in my memory, sir, he would have spoken to the coming of Jesus Christ, and he would have spoken, sir, to the second coming as well. And, you know, I wanted, sir, just to reflect on chapter 40, verse 28. These are the words. Do you know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. And sir, again, I reference that because I am somewhat, I'm amazed at this big conversation that is taking place as to the use of the word creator. And sirs, it is my view, whether you use the term, if your religion, Yahweh or Allah, God, or you use Senator Rogers, the grand geometrician, or the great architect of the universe. What all of that, though, represents is that there is a supreme being that has created everything. And I think that that is fundamental to all religions. And I have to say, sir, that I have absolutely no issue with the use of the word creator. There was also, sir, quite a bit of discussion with respect to the use of sexual orientation. And I'm not going to read the particular part of the charter. Reference has been made to that already. Sir, we are different. As people, we are different. Some people different by choice. Some people different, as Senator Rogers pointed out and educated us on, by biology. But we are different. And we have, sir, to respect each other, whether the decisions persons make are decisions made by them or decisions that have been made for them. And so it reminds me of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, adjusted, yes, but put in place in 1776. And there's part of the U.S. Declaration, the preamble, sir, that I want to reference. And it states, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Written, sir, in 1776. And I reference that because if at that time they had to qualify all men are created equal, you know, sir, it would not have included blacks. You know, sir, it would not have included women. You know, sir, it would not have included the Native American Indians. And I make that point, sir, because this charter speaks, sir, to including everyone. And making reference to those where you are not interested in their sexual orientation simply signals that whomever the persons are, that they can and should be able to participate. I would want to think, sir, that the church of today, whatever the denomination, would welcome all types of persons into the church. I believe, sir, that Jesus would have said, and Senator Rogers could help me, I come not to save the righteous, but sinners. And I am, sir, sometimes concerned that, you know, we want to sit in certain places and by our language and by our actions still engage in discrimination. This document, sir, facilitates for a Barbados where there is no discrimination. And therefore I want, sir, to encourage persons to embrace this document and to let us not only just talk about embracing and being there to help people in this earthly environment, but also to ensure that we facilitate by our actions and by the way that we live our lives. So, as far as I'm concerned, sir, nothing is wrong with qualifying and the detailing what we mean when we say Barbadians, to ensure that it is fully inclusive, because a declaration, sir, that was guaranteeing equal rights, because that is what the U.S. Declaration was doing, was guaranteeing equal rights, however, did not include certain people. I just want, sir, very briefly to speak to some comments made by Senator Drakes where Senator Drakes was referencing, I think, in her contribution, matters of economics. She spoke to the issue of habitats and the reference to the expansion of the tourism sector impacting on the environment and impacting on the coastline. I just wanted, sir, to indicate to this chamber that there are some natural challenges that we have had to confront with respect to the coastline and respect to the coastal environment. I'm happy to tell this chamber that the Barbados Labour Party and a previous government of the Barbados Labour Party carried out significant works for the rehabilitation with respect to beaches on the south coast and on the west coast. In fact, sir, there was a lot of stabilizing and enhancing done of beaches, and in fact, there would have been the creation of some beaches as well. One I can remember well in the area of Welches in Christchurch. I'm sure you are familiar, very familiar, sir, with that area. So between what would be, for those who know the area, when you pass Golden Sands Hotel, going to Oistins, you come to an open area by the sea, and that is an area where a beach, a proper and good beach has been created. Because when I was a little boy, sir, in that area, it was not like that. It was rocky. And I wanted to communicate that there's been significant work done. The coastal infrastructure project that was undertaken, the work that has been done with boardwalks such as the Richard Haynes and the Holtown Waterfront Improvement Projects. All of those, sir, are facilitated by the design of allowing filtration and the facility to ensure, sir, that the quality of the groundwater is enhanced. I wouldn't want, and I just made that brief comment, sir, because I don't want the impression to be given that this government is in any way seeking to ensure that by its pursuit of expansion of the tourism industry, something that we are doing, sir, to the benefit of the people of Barbados, that at the same time we are not looking at those critical and important issues such as those that affect the coastline. I want, sir, to end by making reference to the last statement in the Charter. The statement says, sir, may the commitment we now champion progressively foster and nurture the soul of our nation from generation to generation. If I'm correct, sir, the first reference to soul of the nation appeared in Plato's Republic. In fact, in that document, Plato made a comparison between the soul of the nation and the soul of individual citizens. In that document, sir, he would have made reference to the fact that society should be pursuing certain objectives, and that those objectives should involve the collaboration and a joint venture of the people to ensure that there's an improvement in the state of being of people. And I think, sir, that this document properly seeks to do that. And as we look at the various parts, we have to ensure that the soul of the nation is in concert with the soul of the individuals. And I want, sir, before I close, to say thank you to the co-chairpersons of the committee and the significant work that you have done. I believe, sir, that it is important for us. I believe, sir, it is important for us. Whether, you know what Martin Luther King said, there's a day, whether black men or white men, Jews or Gentiles, Protestants or Catholics, must all join hands. And he made reference to the Negro spiritual. But I think, sir, it is important that within our country, all of us, blacks, whites, Indians, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, those even, sir, that are atheists, that we have to embrace everyone and recognize that everyone has a role to play, and that we should ensure that everyone is recognized and given their space. And sir, with these very few words, I am obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Grant. Senator Tate. Turn on your mic, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as usual, my submission is more of seeking clarity, asking questions, and hoping eventually to have a response thereto, or at least to put it into the public domain. This evening and for the whole day, I've listened to the various submissions, and for the most part, the questions that I had were answered. I heard Senator Rogers speak quite passionately about the use of the word creator, even though there are some who would quote Luke 9, verse 26, which, if my memory serves me correctly, speaks about whoever is ashamed of me and my words, then the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. So there are some who will feel that by not putting God in the charter, and seeing as we just had the minister or one of the ministers making the broad pronouncement that Barbados is a Christian society, there are people who are concerned and confused as to the use of creator with a capital C. That is a big thing, like how we use God with a capital G and the Lord with a capital L. There are some who are concerned, but it is not supposed to form part of the constitutional preamble, and we are moving ahead with that. My concern, though, is based on what I've read in the charter as it relates to sexual orientation. I am not one who is looking at it from the perspective of it's discrimination, it's religious, and so on. My concern is what I read in Appendix 2 as it relates to what was said about sexual orientation, and wondering if it has been addressed or if it will be addressed. I'm going to be specific in a minute, sir. So we have the Article 1 that everybody has repeated. All Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity and rights, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, faith, class, cultural and educational background, ability, sex, gender, or sexual orientation. And I find that listening today, everybody spoke about the person's sexual orientation from I believe, a sexual and who they are as a person perspective. But without saying that I agree with what the leader of the opposition did yesterday, because I didn't listen to him, I didn't hear him, so I don't want to speak to that. I noticed, though, that in Appendix 2, at page 16, at item Roman numeral, I think it is 39. I believe that, and I stand to be corrected, I believe that these are the public submissions, and I haven't tested the veracity of this statement. My question really is, what is the government's position if what was said at item 39 has any validity? And the reason I'm asking is because you see here, and it was quite lengthy, so I'm going to break it up, sir. So we have, I fully agree, that's what this person says, that all Barbadians are born free and equal despite any differences contingent upon birth, beliefs, fortuitous circumstances, background, or lifestyle. However, I suggest that the term sexual orientation not to be included among the specific categories listed. And then the reasons. The term, for example, the person says, is rooted in the scientifically inaccurate beliefs that one, sex is non-binary and gender is fluid. That is, that there is not only male and female, but an indeterminate number of sexes, and there is logically no one-to-one correspondence between sex and gender. Okay, let us move down, sir. We have a situation here he says, or she says, the term is loosely defined and ever evolving. I'm sorry, I've come near to the bottom of it. The World Health Organization identifies 3 elements of sexual orientation: sexual attraction, sexual behavior, and sexual identity. In some countries, acceptance of the term has paved the way for legal incest. According to a 2018 article written by James Cox and published in the Scottish Sun, consensual incest is fully legal in Spain, Russia, and is not strictly prohibited under Portuguese law. There is no law prohibiting consenting relatives from having sex in France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. In Italy, incest is illegal only if it provokes public scandal, when it can suddenly become punishable from 2 to 8 years in jail. The fluid concept of sexual orientation can logically be extended to include pedophilia. In Australia, Italy, the USA, UK, Canada, Switzerland, Norway, and a few other countries, currently, there are groups advocating for the recognition of pedophilia as a sexual orientation and therefore a fundamental right and freedom. The inclusion of the term sexual orientation, this is another comment, in the Charter is prejudicial to that sector of society that subscribes to the sanctity of marriage and to those of us who see the concept as fodder for the deconstruction of marriage and the family and the risky reconstruction of both. So, sir, my question is, as we seek to include it in the Charter, what if have these considerations been fully taken into consideration? Have they been investigated? And are we being wise to include it when words like incest and pedophilia are associated with the terminology sexual orientation? Because I would hate to be saying yes in this august chamber to the inclusion of a phrase, a term, that could possibly allow for the inclusion of the types of persons that I would be very surprised if anyone in this chamber was willing to include when they were thinking of the values of the country and the rights and privileges of our people, when what they're engaging in, as far as I know, is illegal. That is my concern about the inclusion of one of the phrases that has been trending in the discussion of this charter. And for that, I would wish, if not answered today, I don't reasonably expect anyone here to have that answer necessarily, but I would wish that in the future, as we forge ahead, hopefully sooner rather than later, of lining up what is to happen next week with what is to happen in the country, that is looked at in a serious way so that we do know if we are doing the right thing, if we've considered it sufficiently, and all is well before we start looking at it from one perspective only, which is the whole issue of discrimination and religious rights and all of that. and not look at what it could mean for those persons who are looking for loopholes to do harm to our people, particularly our children. Apart from that question, sir, I just want to say one last thing that has come to me arising out of this debate, and it is this. As we proceed forward to new horizons with this charter, and we go to republic, because we're mature and we're 55, and we've been talking about it for a long time, and we're ready, and we're all of those things. I hope and I expect that this trend that I see seeping through debates, where if one does not agree with the position of government, or one dares to ask a question, or one dares to have a varying view or a further view, that you do not see this vilification and this attack and this derisory talk coming from those who are presenting on behalf of the government. It is unbecoming, and it is not in keeping with what should be expected as we mature and move forward with our values, treating people kind, treating people with respect, having humility, and all that is listed in this charter. Thank you, Mr. President. Much obliged to you.
Thank you. No further speakers? Okay, Senator Cummins, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I would wish to thank all of the honorable speakers who have spoken on this topic. I'll start first by attempting to answer some of the questions that have been raised and to respond to some of the challenges that have been presented. So first, Senator Drakes, in a detailed presentation on the economics of growth and development, spoke about a number of things. I believe that Senator Grant, in his response as it relates to sustainable development, spoke to a considerable amount of work that has gone on over several decades, of which I'm certain that the Honourable Senator is very aware of. The work which has been done on things like the environmental impact assessments, the incorporation of new town and country planning development processes, which include environmental and sustainability assessments being incorporated in planning permissions. All of those things, I am sure, we are all well aware of, and therefore to suggest that there has been no work done locally would perhaps be most unfortunate, if not outright untrue. In addition to that, Mr. President, I would wish to say and to draw attention to the fact that certainly a lot of the work done by the Coastal Zone Management Unit, including under this administration by the Ministry of Maritime Affairs, including the designation of areas like Carnal Bay and Folkestone Marine Park and so on as marine preserved areas, are all well known and well publicized activities which have been undertaken by this administration. In fact, I think that there may be some among us who are actively working on the development of some of those projects, and so they may actually be more aware of them than I am, Mr. President. And so quite a bit of work has in fact gone on in addition to that which Senator Grant has spoken about. Specifically, Mr. President, I'm also aware that there are 2 hotel properties, if we relate it to the tourism sector, 2 hotel properties most recently who have undertaken considerable renovation work and rehabilitation work, in particular those on the South Coast, that have now expanded beach access by protective mechanisms being put in place by the construction of groins to be able to protect the shoreline. That was done in collaboration with established international partners who have studied coastlines globally and done a considerable amount of work here in Barbados and in the region. And I would also, much like Senator Grant, not want the misrepresentation to go out there that Barbados speaks globally on issues that it has not treated to locally. That is categorically untrue, and I would wish to ensure that I correct it from the record. Now, Mr. President, I am not certain that there is anything that can be said about Senator Rogers' presentation. It was a stellar presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed his detailed assessment of why some of the concepts that are included in the charter are there, the process by which they have been derived, the way in which they engaged, the consultations in which they undertook. And though I know that everyone did not and may not have participated, there was an opportunity provided for everyone to so do. And I did hear the comment being made at some point that there was a problem with the process. But Mr. President, I think Senator Rogers and the members of the committee did their utmost by way of publicizing these events, inviting persons to participate, having closed door sessions, and still being in a position to say, what would you wish to submit, even if you are not able to come and physically present. And it is on that basis that we now have the appendices in great detail to which Senator Tate has just spoken about. I wish also to recognize the contribution of Senator Boyce. Senator Boyce, when you spoke about the Charter of Barbados in 2021 versus the Charter of 1662 and the Constitution that came in the midst of those two things, and therefore how this positions this current charter, I like when he said what he said and how he said it, because, Mr. President, I think that he usually brings a certain legal mind to processes like this. And he went into great detail about why this was important, and most importantly, what it was not, which is that it is not a legally binding document. Senator Springer, Senator Adams on our side, of course, contributed in detail to the substantive discussion of the actual charter itself and what was contained therein. Now, I want to also just speak to two examples that were raised. I believe it was by Senator Nurse. He asked about why not the force of law. I think we have gone into that in great detail, but I also want to give an example of another similar charter that exists, that inscribes the values of our people. The Charter of Civil Society of the CARICOM community is an example of a document that has no enforceability. It does not have any status in law, but it does capture the values and the principles of us, the Caribbean people, we, the Caribbean people, and it is another example, Mr. President, of that enshrinement of the values of which we spoke. And they're not convenient when speaking of other people and not to ourselves, but this is reflective, Mr. President, of what we would want to see. Now, Senator Nurse, I would wish to draw your attention to the document, the charter itself, because there were two elements that you said you were regretful that they were not included in the document, but I know it's lengthy. I know that sometimes it's easy not to see everything that is in there, but under equitable development, Mr. President, I would wish through you to draw Senator Nurse's attention to paragraph 5, where it speaks about, we pledge to make the best use of opportunities for our further education, both formal and informal. We shall encourage industry, a spirit of innovation, entrepreneurial endeavor, sporting excellence, artistic creativity, media literacy, critical thinking, responsible use of technology, plurilingualism, and so on and so on. So there is the reference to technology, and then right below it, it speaks to, we commit to building a progressive and cohesive society through the empowerment and full engagement of our youth and communities in the pursuit of personal excellence and the social and economic development of Barbados. So I wanted to give you the assurance that the elements of which you spoke, they are very much incorporated in the charter because they are part of who we are. Now, I'm not legal at all, and so I would not be in a position to begin to answer the question raised by Senator Tate. I have noted it, however, at the document, but what I would say in my non-legal way is that in Barbados, and if I were to draw on the debate yesterday in the other place, and the responses made by other members of the government side in the other place to that which was spoken about by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, pedophilia and incest are still, under our laws, to the best of my understanding, illegal in Barbados. And so the question of consent is central to what is incorporated so far. Adults, me, you, someone else, but children are not incorporated among those who can give consent. And so I will leave, however, the answer to that question in a substantive way to the legal minds, who I'm sure will come back at some point, hopefully in the near future, with an appropriate and more detailed response. But Mr. President, I want to close today's discussion on this charter on the following note. We've had a long road as a people and as a nation. There are so many things about us as a people that we would wish were not so. There are so many things that we would want to change. There's so many things that we still need to change. There is still so much work to do, so much work that needs to be done. But Mr. President, every long journey begins with one step. And this is a long journey that we have been on. And each step that we make is a part of that journey. And it takes us closer to where we need to be as a people. I understand that there are those who have not necessarily had an opportunity to read the full charter. And what is unfortunate is that oftentimes when reports are circulated on the charter, that is then what becomes a discussion around the document that has been described by everyone in this place as a well-drafted document under the leadership of the committee who had responsibility for it. But we've spent the last few weeks in a fixed conversation on two elements of that charter. But there is so much more to us. There's so much more to this moment. There's so much more to this process, and definitely so much more to this charter than those two things of which we have been speaking. And I feel as though we have to do justice, not just to the work of a committee, but to the principles that are enshrined within this document. Mr. President, in the conclusion of the charter, it reads as follows. It says, we, the people of this great nation, Barbados, encouraged by the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before us. Resilience is a word we use a lot. Resilience is a word we use a lot in terms of sustainability, environmental preservation, but it also is a word that we use all the time for overcoming adversity. We are encouraged, Mr. President, by the resilience of our people. That is not to say, Mr. President, that there are not those people of whom Senator Drake spoke that are on their last hope. That is not to say that, Mr. President. I think the administration that I represent would not have invested over $85,000 in care packages if they didn't know that there were people who needed that hope. I think the administration that I represent would not have invested in ensuring that free education was reinstated for people who could stand up today and say, I have my master's or my bachelor's, because we knew that people need hope. Mr. President, the administration that we are a part of, all of us on this side and are proud to represent, would not have invested probably more in education and public health and social services than we have done in the productive sectors over the course of not just this administration, but our history as a political party. If we don't believe in giving people hope, and if we didn't believe in giving people hope, Mr. President, we would not have done any of those things. Mr. President, when countries were closing down and they were not having businesses functioning, they sent home and they did stimulus checks to people to stay at home because people need hope. Mr. President, we call for businesses to re-engage those persons and to keep them at work and to engage them in training because people need hope and we know it. Mr. President, I don't know if many people have seen it, but yes, there are those who are still waiting as a result of what has happened in the last 2 years for their severance checks. But the vast majority have received them, Mr. President. Do we not see that too? Or do we only call attention to that which is negative? But I'll say it this way as well, Mr. President. If it is that one person or those two persons or those hundreds of people or thousands of people of the majority who have not received their benefits are worthy of attention, we agree. And you know why we agree, Mr. President? Because we are the government that believes that if one person, as Senator Rogers said, is facing discrimination, that person is worthy of being protected under the law. We are also that administration that believes that if public transportation, for example, is being provided, if there are 5 people traveling on that bus who are disabled and who need to have seats, we are the government for those people, Mr. President. I don't want us to go down this line where we choose, because it has to be a choice, we choose to selectively present that which is not before us in its entirety. We choose to be disingenuous at times, and it leads people into thinking things which are not real, Mr. President. I believe that we have all seen photos of all political parties on the ground all over this country in the last couple of months. Everybody is on the ground because they know that people need hope, and they know that people need help. We would not have given supermarket vouchers for people to buy food for their families. We would not have been announcing, as the Prime Minister has, about purchasing for businesses uniforms because they are hurting, because we don't know that people need hope. Mr. President, we live in this country and we don't just hear, we live it too, we feel it too. And so this charter, Mr. President, it tells us that despite all that we have gone through, despite the moments where we feel as though all is wrong, there is still hope because we are a resilient people. And we are in a government that cares about people and has put our money where our mouth is, and the records will reflect that without ambiguity, Mr. President. We go on to say we stand on the threshold of a bright future, and we boldly embrace and solemnly affirm the aspirations contained in the Charter of Barbados. May the hope it engenders permeate the length and breadth of this nation, and distinguish it as a land of equal opportunity and enfranchisement, fairness and social justice, peace and security, and solidarity and cooperation. None of them perfect, Mr. President, but all aspirational, all works in progress. May the commitment we now champion, this government now champions, I, on behalf of this government this evening, now champion, progressively foster and nurture the soul of our nation from generation to generation. And with these words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. The question is that this resolution do now pass. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This resolution is therefore now passed. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government's business for today's sit-in, and I beg to move that this sit-in now be adjourned. Sign it.
The question is that the Senate be now adjourned. Sign it. Those
Mr.
honourable
President,
senators.
before I think you're allowed to rise at this time.
Sure.
I think, sir,
Senator
it will be
Boyce.
remiss of us if we recognize what is supposed to happen in a few days, that we don't make some form of farewell or declaratory statement. It will be the last sitting of the Senate as an independent country, and if we are brought back, we will be then sitting as a republic. So I would allow someone from the government side to take us forward, sir. Or yourself, Mr. President, if you'll accede to the invitation.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. For me, it is such a natural part of the transition, another stage in our nationhood, that it felt like another walk in the park. But in all seriousness, yes, the records will reflect that in terms of our Parliament. You know that our Parliament is constituted as the head of state, currently Her Majesty the Queen, the President and members of the Senate, Speaker and members of the House of Assembly. And as part of the constitutional arrangements, with the President being the head of state, the Parliament will, in the Constitution, therefore be the President of Barbados, the Senate and members of the Senate, President and members of the Senate, and the Speaker and members of the House of Assembly. So after, from 1639, continuous sitting of our Parliament with the previous configuration, then we will move to the new configuration, quite similar, but notably different, that our head of the head of state will be a Barbadian, born and bred, as we say. And I think that what is of significance and the challenge that I will throw out on this occasion is, as noted in the Charter, which we spent hours debating, and thank you very much for your rich contributions, diverse perspectives, suggestions, questions. It was a very rich and interesting day. Our Parliament has met continuously since 1639. It has not always been the instrument of progressive thought and reformative action as we have become accustomed to in our lifetimes. This very Parliament has been the tool which maintained the inequalities which were at the foundation, economic, social, political, which were at the foundation of our society in those early days. And it was interesting that, unlike some other countries' experiences, we have not had an interruption in Parliament as an institution whilst we achieve radical transformation, the genuine majority rule. And in fact, there is in our Parliament buildings in Bridgetown, there's a plaque, or a series of plaques on the wall of the entrance to the House of Assembly with the names of members of Parliament from 1951. 1951 being the date that everyone agrees when we pretty much had a true representative Parliament, in that we had adult suffrage, because there was no income or other gender or other qualification, and that every adult could vote to choose their members of Parliament. And so we can mark several seminal moments, but for sure for me, that 1951, where anyone could be nominated or could seek nomination to be elected to Parliament, anyone could enter, and much of the legislation since then has really been about economic enfranchisement, social advancement, and really reflecting the will of the people. Today, that the social activism and the use of modern communications tools, the social media, the opening of the communication space has really put into real time and truly democratized the matter of social discourse. So there's no member of Parliament who can be immune to the views that are contending out there, who will be in a position where they cannot genuinely know what their constituents and other members of the society feel on any issue. So my challenge really is that as we continue in the pro-tradition of this Parliament, especially post-1951, that we recognize our role as reformers. We commit to looking at the social contract, and the social contract in terms of the relationship between the government and the governed, and we seek always to enrich, seek to promote inclusiveness, diversity, to emphasize social development and development of our people. And the economy is merely a means through which they're able to increase their utility, to use the economic terms, but increase the value of all the efforts to them. So we should accept and look forward to the great challenge of Barbados as a parliamentary republic, and really continue our work as parliamentarians to reform. Reform doesn't always mean that what we were doing in the past was wrong. Sometimes it does. But very often, as we've seen in COVID-19 situation, the world has changed and changed quickly. However right we were at any point in time, we always have to do that environmental scan, do the analysis, and as we were urged by Senator Drakes today, to recognize that the world has now opened its eyes to the fact that environmental sustainability has to be at the center or the anchor of any economic development strategy. And so concepts like that, sustainability, are all part of the modern thinking. So we really do have to ensure that we continue to be a reformist parliament, and that we not only respond to the cries out of or the will of our people, but we also look forward and set necessary structures, rules, regulations in place to enable everyone to be much better off, to build a better society, to improve the happiness of our people, and to advance this country, Barbados. I'm thankful, like you, for the honor and opportunity to have served in this Parliament under present legal arrangements. I look forward, and we all look forward, speaking on your behalf, to continue our work next week and beyond under new and different arrangements. So I look forward to seeing many of you over the next few days as we engage in the formalities, celebrations, and whatever else are necessary as part of the celebration of our independence, 55th anniversary, and the commencement of our future as a republic rather than a constitutional monarchy. Thank you very much, Senators. This sitting is now adjourned sine die.